Great to see everybody. We just had tea down the hall, but I think we maybe everybody's having a late morning, so we missed some of you down there. But great to see you here for our CBCS webinars. I just want to start by acknowledging country. So I acknowledge the Yagara Turrbal peoples, traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet and work, and the Wandamuka and Kabi Kabi peoples for all of us who work in sea country in this area. And on behalf of UQ and the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation Science, I pay my respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to the country and all of their contributions for so much about this week at ICCB in particular, and continue to try to think about how we engage with traditional owners of the land and make sure that we learn from them about conservation that's been going on for millennia. Okay, with that, I'd like to do some introductions here. This is a different seminar. Today we have two seminars, and I'm just going to actually introduce one of you, and then Anna, before you're off, I'll come back to see you as well. Right. Okay, so this morning we have Catherine Tait. If you didn't meet Catherine during ICCB or attend the workshops as well during ICCB about publishing.
I didn't go to that.
Oh, all right, that's because we know. But Catherine is the scientific editor for One Earth and has spent a number of years with Cell Press. And today is going to be talking about publishing impactful science. So with that,
Thank you. Yeah. So I know we've all been sitting through a lot of talks this week, very fun, very exciting, probably more interesting than mine. So I'll try and keep this fun, fast, and also hopefully instructional at the very least when it comes to publishing science. So a quick background on me, a science editor, a technical editor for Cell Press. I have a bachelor's degree in science from the University of Michigan in ecology and evolutionary biology. I studied social behavior and pupa wasps while I was there. I spent a year running around the rainforest chasing monkeys because I thought I wanted to study primates. I did not want to study primates. I then did my PhD at Colorado State University. I'm just noticing now all my slides are oddly sorted. Sorry about that. In ecology, I studied evolution and maintenance of cognitive variability in 4 species of honeybee. I did a little bit of a postdoc for a few years at the Center for Animal Cognition Research in Toulouse. And after about 2 years of that, decided I wasn't really interested in doing research anymore so much as I was interested in reading it, writing it, which is what brought me to work as a scientific editor at Cell Press. One Earth. And that is what brought me to you guys today. To talk just a little bit about what the editorial process looks like from my end, what editors look for when they're handling a paper, tips and tricks, if that's what you want to call it, for getting your paper past my desk and out to reviewers. So all this starts, I guess, with submitting your paper to a journal. And I think my first piece of advice and the best advice I can give authors is when you're trying to ensure that your paper is sent out to review and accepted, you want to make sure it aligns with the scope of the journal. And I know that that can be a frustrating word because what does that mean, right? Journals have scope. So this has to be in scope. This isn't quite in scope for the journal. When I think about the scope, I think about 3 particular things, which is the audience of the journal, so who's reading it. What is the novel advance? What is the significant novel component? And then how significant is the advance? All science is novel, all is significant, but how novel and how great of an advance over the existing literature is there? A brief example of this in practice from my own very short-lived career as a scientist was a paper I published back my PhD on inter-individual variation in the use of social information during learning in honeybees. If I wrote that again, I would change that title immediately. But anyway, when we're picking a journal for this paper, we're thinking we want it to be read by honeybee researchers. We want it to be read by social insect researchers, animal behavior experts, cognitive ecology experts, and maybe, because we framed this article this way, evolutionary biologists, because we were interested in the evolution of social information use. So when it comes time to pick a journal, an audience for that group, certainly Apidology, the Journal of Honeybee Biologists, maybe insect behavior, animal behavior, certainly cognitive ecology, yes, but because this was about evolutionary biology or evolution of a trait, we pushed it into proceedings. And that's actually where it ended up finding its home after it got rejected from current biology. So even I get rejected as an editor. Well, I wasn't an editor back then, but I am now. I got rejected. So that's how we kind of went about choosing a journal for this piece of research. And I think it's important to remember, because I understand the desire to want to put your research in the most highly cited or most impactful journal. But what you really want to think about is putting your science in the hands of people who are going to read it, are going to be interested in it, and who are going to cite it. At the end of the day, that's who you really want to get your research to. So that's my, I guess, advice on selecting a journal. Don't always aim for the highest one, aim for the one that best fits your research. Um, on that note, what on earth, the journal I work for, what are we interested in publishing? Who are we? Who is our target audience? We are a low volume, high impact, broad sustainability science research journal. So I handle everything related to biodiversity conservation, but I also handle food science and land use change. And that's just me. Other editors at our journal handle things related to policy, green energy, green infrastructure, nutrient cycling, atmospheric science. It's a very broad readership. So when we are assessing papers for fit with our journal, we often wonder, will this research be of interest to people potentially outside your own field? If you study the design of protected areas, would someone who also studies agri-food systems be really intrigued by that research? Would they maybe want to read that and include that in their own sort of research program? So it's a broader audience. And in terms of the novelty and the significance of the advance, all science, I think, is novel. All science is an advance. When we assess a paper for novelty in advance, what we do is we receive your article, we read the cover letter, the intro, the discussion, methods, results, and then we go and do a brief literature survey. We compare it to what is currently being published in the field, and try and place your research in that context, place your results in that context. And that's what we can determine novelty in advance there. But assuming that your paper comes past me and I'm really excited by it and I send it out to peer review, that is kind of the next part of this process. And I know that peer review is kind of the least liked part as well. But a little background on how we select peer reviewers. Normally, what we'll do is once we've read your paper and we've decided it's a great fit, we identify all of the technical aspects that are going to need to be assessed, because I cannot be an expert in everything that comes to my desk, right? So I need to make sure that I find reviewers who are experts. So I like to look at methods, analysis, quality of data, model organism. If you've worked in a specific region, if you've worked in a specific country, these are all things that I'm going to need expertise on. I can't just ask anyone to review your paper. As a note, interdisciplinary papers, which we're very interested in publishing, tend to take a little bit more time to get out to review because we need more expertise to assess that. We check for, once we have our list of potential reviewers, we check for conflicts of interest. We have software that checks this. It's kind of like Web of Science, where basically I can put your name in and then list all the reviewers, and it'll say if you've published together or if you've worked together in the past 5 or 10 years. So we can try to avoid sending your paper to your best friend or maybe one of your colleagues if possible. And as I'm sure many of you know, this process is taking increasingly very long amounts of time. We try to aim for 3 to 4 weeks for the peer review process for that initial decision at Warner. But I also understand that you, who are the actual reviewers, have other constraints on your time, and sometimes you need an extension, and that's fine. A quick kind of look at how this works. This is one of my favorite papers, one of the first ones I got to handle all the way through to publication. When I was finding reviewers for this, I needed to find experts with experience in using citizen science to help design areas for conserving biodiversity in Bangladesh. So we had to have a reviewer from Bangladesh who worked in conservation biology, area design. We had to have people that worked in citizen science and using that to help develop protected areas. So that was kind of how we shortlisted reviewers for that. If there were special methods or analyses being done, statistical analyses, I would then go find reviewers for that as well. But in this case, we didn't do that. That's kind of how we think about finding peer reviewers. The evaluation part. So once the reviews come in, they come to me first, and I get to read them, and I get to see what the reviewers have said. People have asked me in the past if someone writes a rude review or an inappropriate review. We reject that review, we uninvite that reviewer, and then we find a new reviewer. I'm not going to send you unproductive commentary. That's not the point of peer review, right? It's important to note that peer review, the decision it's not like a vote. It's not that two people say no and one say yes. When I send a paper out to review, because we send so few out, I'm excited about it. The research I send out, I'm kind of attached to. I want to see it published at that point. So I like to ask, can the critique be just addressed? If you can address it with more data or different analyses or taking a different perspective, then I'm not going to reject your paper. I'm going to give you major revisions or minor revisions decision. If the critique is more along the lines of the analysis is faulty and here's why, or the data aren't of proper quality, we might recommend reject at that point. But I like to think, is it possible for you to address these comments? And if so, you deserve a chance to try and address them, and I'll send that back to the reviewers when that happens. But that's, in a very, very quick bubble, how the peer review process works. Once it comes back to you, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this process. Read the comments and then just pause. I understand I've gotten nasty peer review comments in the past on my own research. It's really easy to be passionate about your research and want to respond immediately. Just take a moment. Pause, read it. Consider, could or should all aspects of the review request be implemented? They don't have to be. Reviewers make suggestions. As editors, we read that. We don't expect you to say, I'm going to do everything the reviewer tells me to do. We assess those reviews as well and determine whether or not some of them are actionable or whether they're valuable for the manuscript. If something should not be implemented, just explain why not at that point. Make it clear how you address all the comments in point-by-point reference. And also, even though the manuscript is with you, I'm still your handling editor. So if you have questions or concerns, you can always reach out to me. And I'm happy to help you develop your responses to the reviewer. I've seen reviewer comments. I can liaise with the reviewer if you're confused about what they've asked you to do. I can reach out to them and get more clarification on their comments as well. So I'm always there in the background if you need help with that. Finally, we know that this process, it looks linear, but it's absolutely not. Once it comes back from revisions, does it go back to peer review? Do we reject it at that point? Do we recommend a transfer maybe to a different journal where the audience might be a better fit? Or do we accept it? This process can go on. But in the end, all aspects of this do depend on people, and people make mistakes, and appeals are often part of this process. The one thing I really want to do as an editor is publish interesting, impactful science. And so if I reject your paper, the reviewers reject it, and you think we've made a mistake, let us know, because it's in everyone's best interest for us to publish our work if it really is exciting and interesting and good. And if we've made a mistake, we want to know that as well. The appeal process is a little different, and I can speak on that more in person if you guys want afterward. Right, so just a couple, I think I have time for this, just a couple points on how to, I guess, convince your editor or how to structure your submission a little bit for us. So by the end of the cover letter, the abstract, the introduction, the editor should know that the subject is within the scope of the journal. You talked a little bit about scope, what the knowledge gap is, how you address that knowledge gap and why it's important to address that knowledge gap. Do point to the existing literature, clearly. Describe any methods you've used. Again, this is really important, especially if we're looking for reviewers. We're going to want to know what methods you use and where you work so that we can find experts with that knowledge. And your big headline findings. What is the big, impactful, kind of punchy thing you want to leave us with? Cover letters. I'm going to make a note on this because I get a lot of questions about it. No cover letter is bad, but some are useless. I've never rejected a paper because the cover letter isn't well written. The worst thing a cover letter can be is just a replica of the abstract. If all you do is tell me what the abstract is, it's useless because I'm going to read the abstract anyway. And I really encourage authors to consider leveraging each component of your submission to tell the editor and the reviewers different things. My apologies for the next part of this slide. It's hideous. However, I'll make it up to you. I do have an example cover letter, and I'm happy to share it with anyone. My go-to kind of framework for how I would write a cover letter. The important thing to remember is cover letters don't need to be formulaic. Abstracts and introductions, we have a really specific way that we write science, but your cover letter actually doesn't have to be. It can be pretty informal. What I always recommend is just 4 sections, paragraph sentences, explicitly tell the reader, me, background methods results. If you want that's kind of like the abstract, condense it, put that in your first paragraph. Another paragraph that is the knowledge gap. And go ahead and use this exact verbiage. Some previous literature has explored insert topic. However, no study to date has examined what you've done. And then this is important. This is an important knowledge gap for X reasons. And then whatever those reasons are, you can say reason 1, this, reason 2, that, reason 3, this. This just makes it easier for us to assess. Are your findings as novel as you say they are? And it makes it really easy for us to do a literature search and figure out where your work fits in the context of the broader literature. Significance of the paper, another paragraph. I always just say this paper is significant because and why. If why is gonna, who is it significant for and why? And finally, last paragraph, who's the audience? The results of this will be of interest to researchers in what fields is going to be interested in that. And this work, if it does complement research that's previously been published in that journal, include it, whether it's your research or someone else's research. If the journal has published on that topic really recently, obviously it's the scope and their interest. So draw the editor's attention to that. Yeah, that's my little spiel on the cover letter. I wish we saw more of them with just more explicit information. In terms of convincing potential reviewers to accept, remember that when a reviewer gets your manuscript, they only see the title and the abstract. So make sure that the title and the abstract are kind of a hook. At One Earth, we encourage authors to frame their titles as your big finding, not what you did. However, I know that varies by journal. So that is something to consider depending on who you're publishing with or who you're looking to publish with. The abstract, again, this is a really not great slide. The abstract is a bit of a monster. At One Earth, our abstracts are only 150 words, so it's pretty condensed. So we always recommend explain immediately why is this important and what is the knowledge gap. In this case, insects dominate the biosphere, but their populations are plummeting worldwide. This is really important. The knowledge gap, protected areas could act as safeguards, but we don't have explicit evidence on that. It's already documented. What is your big headline finding? Here, 76% of the insect species assessed didn't meet their targets. The context of that result, the context of that data, which is in blue, and then just 1 statement or 2 statements on the indication of broader significance. And that will kind of align with whatever your journal interest in publishing is. I'm happy to also share this slide. I know this is a lot of text. You don't have to do a lot of text. And finally, good science communication is storytelling. You consider that your manuscript it's a story. Your introduction should kind of build a sense of tension or excitement for the reader. And the conclusion, the discussion should really tell the reader why they care. Don't leave anything kind of up to interpretation for them. Be explicit with your writing. If reviewers are confused about what your results are, if they're confused about the scope of your science, that's going to come back in review and they're going to ask for revisions, explaining more in the discussion and in the introduction. And finally, my last little piece of advice, because you guys are the readers at some point, you are the reviewers, you're the readers. As you know, readers are busy. Try to make this as easy as possible on your reviewers, and it might lead to a smoother review process. And I think that's everything. I think I made it. So that's my email right there. And that's the email for One Earth. I've been told that the LinkedIn and the Blue Sky things work now. Been told. I'm happy to answer any other questions about open access, interdisciplinary publishing, how we do transfers, the broader Cell Press portfolio, One Earth theme issues, appeals, article types, AI, and also I'm also just happy to talk to any of you guys later today about your research, what you're working on. If you have questions about manuscripts, I'm more than happy to sit down and kind of workshop stuff as well. So that's my spiel.
Few questions. There were some before moving on. Yes.
I have a question about the scope.
Yeah.
So for me, I access papers via keywords. So for me personally, I look for keywords, not for a journal.
Yeah.
And so when I publish something, I'm looking more as a scientist, the way the system goes for prestige or for a certain level of publishing. And so I don't need my papers when I submit them to be found by the journal, but I need sort of stamp approval that it is in a certain journal. So is there this kind of conflict between scientists just trying to publish as high as they can, and journals sort of caring about a scope that journals can want scientists about? Or is this conflict just in our head and doesn't really play out that way?
Ooh, well, if I understand the question right, you're asking, so researchers care more about the impact of the journal, and then the journal itself cares more about the scope or um um I mean, we think about our readership, I guess, and we think about who reads the journal. I don't know, like I've never rejected a paper because the the researchers who submitted it have never submitted to us before or something like that. Um, I'm not quite sure I understand what.
Can I just put something in there? Because I think it's really interesting that the um, early career researchers in particular are very concerned about the impact factor of the journal. And I frequently find myself having discussions and the sort of showing that the papers for me that have been the most cited, right, which affect your H index, are not actually necessarily the ones that are in science. We'll hear about one next, which will be cited out the wazoo, but like it is. I have papers in marine policy that have been cited 400 plus times or something like that. That I think actually the individual metric for researchers is changing things quite a bit instead of just the impact factor, because we have these other metrics. I'm curious your perspective on like the individual paper-based metric versus the journal metrics.
Yeah, I always think a little bit, and I talked about a little bit that you just want to make sure that your paper goes to the people who are going to cite it, right? Which is what you're getting at.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter really necessarily where it's cited, as long as the audience who reads it is going to cite it a lot, and that will drive up your own individual H index. Yeah, impact factor, it's a weird one. Because it kind of it speaks more to just like the broadness, I think, of the audience and who reads it. Because if you have a lot of people reading the work, inevitably it does get cited, but you can also compensate for that by just having a lot of people in your own field read your work and cite it. So there's different ways to kind of approach that, I guess. I don't know if that answered your question either.
Other questions? Yeah.
Just curious about the one of using people using AI from both sides, as in the authors who are using AI in helping them structure certain their sentence, or even the extent of using that, and the other end of the reviewer using AI to review the articles.
Yeah. So right now, I think from our perspective, I think last time I checked, we had a requirement that people who use AI to generate text had to like make a statement about it. We don't have anything so far that checks whether the reviewers are using AI, which is becoming a conversation. This is an ongoing conversation. I know at Self Press about once a month, everyone sits down and it's like, we're seeing more instances of AI getting used to help write as well as to help review. I like to think that part of my job is sort of acting as a barrier or protection against that. If I get a review that is just a useless review, I read it and I turn it away. I can't give you a review that's not constructive. So if a reviewer is just kind of giving you this bland sort of feedback, that's not useful for anyone. So that's part of it.
Thank you so much for the talk. I would like to ask you a question about your choices to go into your current job. I oftentimes find myself a little bit ill-equipped giving advice to my students in terms of how to find other pathways that are not kind of like the boring, undergraduate, master's, PhD, 10 postdocs, faculty position. Any advice that you might have for students, maybe, for how to find a job like yours?
Yeah. So I think for me, what was important was figuring out what I did like and what I didn't like about my career. So I was like 2 years into a postdoc, and I had 2 more years of funding, and I realized, oh my God, I don't want to do this. It was like exhausting for me to think about doing 2 more years of research. So it did take a little bit of time to kind of figure out what did I like about science. I didn't want to give up science entirely. That was part of my life. I did a PhD postdoc. So it was, I guess, for me, straightforward. I really did enjoy the writing process. I wrote kind of a lot. Whether or not it was successful, I don't know. But I did enjoy writing. So I wanted to find something in science, reading and writing. For a job like this specifically, there are posting boards. I know that if you go to like the Nature website, and then at the very bottom it will say jobs and careers in nature, and it'll actually just take you to a posting board where it's not just Nature, it's all the big publishing houses, Cell Press, Nature. I think Wiley posts on there as well, where they're looking for positions like scientific editors. And I'm also happy if anyone is interested in this sort of career. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to share my CV or what. I don't know why my boss selected me, because for reference, I did not have any work as an editor before joining. I got a lot of training. I spent 6 months. Our editor in chief trained me for 6 months to be an editor. So it is a potentially introductory position, considering if you have a PhD, that is. But yeah, I'm more than happy to talk to people about kind of what that looked like, what that process was for me, and any materials I have, happy to share.
I've got a quick one on time. I'm sure I've got an eye on the time, but just Tina Skinner's asking, Catherine, how are you dealing with how difficult it is to find reviewers at the moment, or do you not have the problem? I'm an associate editor for Ecology and Evolution, which is lower down the impact scale, but sometimes having to invite 20+ people to review a paper. Have you discussed paying reviewers for their time at all?
Yeah, it's 2 parts to that question. First part, finding reviewers takes time. It absolutely takes time. I would say 3 days a week, I'm looking for reviewers, and this is a really involved process. So absolutely, we're struggling, especially as your papers become more complex. If we're dealing with multiple experts or multiple types of expertise, if we have a paper that's on food security, but also it has policy implications, now I'm looking for reviewers with all of this. Sometimes when I talk to other editors, maybe one thing you can do is, if you find someone who has like the right expertise for like an analysis, and they work kind of in that space, but that's not their area, you can tell them explicitly in the email, maybe, we really want your expert opinion on this particular component of the paper, and they might be a little more willing to review. Obviously, then you have to make sure that other, the theoretical background has to be achieved via review from someone else. In terms of paying for reviews, I've heard this kind of put around a lot. I think that in theory, it's a good idea. In practice, I think it would be incredibly difficult. I once asked my PhD advisor if I offered him $100, would he review a paper for me? And I don't, faculty make kind of good money, depending, I guess. I don't know. I don't know that $100 is going to be the turning point for someone to make a review. There's also the concern that if you're offering money, what will happen is that, when I was a PhD student and I was reviewing papers, I was broke. I made $1,800 a month. I would love to get paid $100 for each review and review 5 papers a month, but then the quality of my review will go down. So there would be a potential problem of high quantity but low quality of review. And also, I guess, from a really practical standpoint, I have no idea how you navigate the taxes of that. So we do have an issue of it would be a system that I think would be very quickly abused potentially. And we might miss, sometimes you really do need expert opinion from certain people, and $100 is not gonna make a difference to them. I pulled that number out of nowhere. I don't know how much money it would take to make one to read a paper and review it.
I do think we have to move on, but Dr. Tait will be here afterwards maybe, and be able to take some further questions. So please join me in thank you.